welcome to TeleLumiere. Today we have a special show. I have my son David Labranche with me today. David Labranche, a graduate of Simmons College, Simmons University, with a Master of Social Work. He's also a graduate of Fitchburg State University with a Bachelor in Human Services.
That's correct.
So it's a pleasure to have David with me today. We're going to, the topic of today's show is mental health stigmas in Black and brown communities. David Labranche, welcome to TeleLumiere.
Thanks for having me. Long overdue.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, well, from what you've already discussed, I recently graduated from Simmons University with my master's in social work. Long journey, but happy to finally be done. I currently work in a partial hospitalization program. What I do is dual diagnosis group on mental health and substance abuse. I also do addiction counseling, again, group for evening clientele who may not be able to commit to being there during the day.
But what are some common stigmas about mental health in Black and brown communities?
I'm happy you asked that. So the stigma about mental health in Black and brown communities is simply that it's not an issue to really focus on. It's more of an issue for those that may be considered weak-minded. And part of that is, in Black and brown communities, there is this mentality of perseverance will aid you in getting through any of life's obstacles, which in theory is correct. To be perseverant does allow you to tackle whatever life throws at you. But to need a little bit of help getting to your destination is not any matter of weakness.
How do you address these stigmas and the need for mental health support in the Black and brown communities as a mental health clinician?
That's a great question. So firstly, I would like to talk about the relationship between nature versus nurture. When we consider nature, we consider the mentality that some people are more inept to be able to navigate challenges with more ease than others. It's just science. However, some people need a little bit more of hand-holding, a little bit more direction, a little bit more encouragement. In the Black and brown community, when we look at social deterrents of health, being poverty, issues with transportation, issues with maybe low income, housing insecurity, lack of parental influence in some of the younger demographics, we notice that the aspect of nurture is not always there. So when you think of the nature, you then wonder if people are not provided with the same encouragement as their, white counterparts. Are they going to come to the same conclusions in life, the same ability to achieve their goals in the same time frame? And it's not a matter of weakness per se, it's a matter of just not having the nurture. What we also want to consider is that there is this mentality in society that we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But when we think of that phrase, we don't consider how much aid people who love saying that have in pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. It's easy to say pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you have two parents in the household, you're coming from a middle class family, you may have a college fund already in play, you may have a network of connections aiding you to achieving your goals. Versus those who have to really start from the bottom and wonder, how do I get where I need to be?
Mm-hmm. What are the biggest challenges facing people in these communities, and how do you plan to change their view on mental health?
You know, some of the bigger challenges facing people in the Black and brown communities is the aspect of education on mental health. You know, from a cultural standpoint, there is a mentality of, you know, putting more faith in religion, more try and try again aspect, which is in all fairness good. You know, having something to believe in goes a long way. Having goals in general goes a long way. But when we talk about a driving force, sometimes it's more than just prayer. And sometimes, you know, there's certain things in life that can deter us from sustaining optimism in the future, whether it be the loss of a parent, the pandemic of drugs in the surrounding communities, housing insecurities, not knowing where the next meal is coming from. All of these things can affect an individual's ability to sustain motivation in achieving their goals. So education on resources that are available to them is key. Many people may want help, but have no idea where to turn. And many people feel that the hardest part is asking for help because of the vulnerability of doing so. By asking for help, we show our most vulnerable sides. And when we don't necessarily get the answers we need in real time, that can sometimes take away from our motivation to keep going.
What are the most common barriers Black and brown communities face when seeking mental health care?
Wait lists. You know, right now, given you know, a reaction from the coronavirus pandemic, there is a long wait for telehealth or in-person services. A lot of the times, finding a therapist that you can connect with is a lot of the uphill battle. You know, it's hard to feel comfortable as a minority coming from a Black and brown community with someone who they may feel may not relate to what they're dealing with. You know, for instance, if I was looking for a therapist and, you know, my therapist, you know, does not know anything of the Black plight, does not know anything about the Caribbean, does not know anything about being raised by immigrant parents, you know, part of what I'm doing in my therapeutic session is morely educating them than them offering intervention that can aid in providing solution. Now, not every therapist is a subject matter expert on everything they know. You know, there is a learning curve. We provide intervention that is backed by empirical evidence, but we also take in a cultural perspective to make each of our approaches different per clientele. Now, when you're working in a field that's predominantly ran by Caucasian females, it's hard to sometimes find someone that you believe that can relate to, in the sense of, you know, really understanding what you're saying versus just providing appropriate behavioral responses to hearing something unfortunate. You know, we talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is simply saying something to fill the blank space in certain situations, whereas empathy is, you know, understanding that you may not know what this person is going through, but you can allow them to speak, to be heard, and collaborate with them to find a solution together.
In your opinion, how much impact cultural belief have on the perceived stigmas on mental health within these communities?
So, with a cultural impact, many Black and Brown communities don't believe in talking about their problems outside of the home base. They believe in finding solutions as a family. And sometimes the solution itself comes with, sometimes the problem itself is from within the family. This is why we see a history of generational abuse and trauma where things are not dealt with and it seems to recycle into the next generation as learned behavior. So part of the stigma is, part of providing the solution is creating the understanding that the stigma needs to be eliminated. A lot of times when I am introduced to a new family that may need intervention, and I may be dealing with, parents that think that what I'm doing is an invasion of privacy. They may be ordered to do counseling services through the Department of Children and Families, given a concern that was raised. A lot of the initial conversation is me saying, I don't want to take away necessarily from your ability to parent. I want to understand what is not working and where the concern is being raised. And collectively, what we would like to do is find a solution. In some situations, the child is removed given safety concerns, but in most case scenarios, the goal is reunification and education and providing resources to aid the parent in providing as much as they can for their child. To add on to that, another aspect is, blind faith in the nature. There is the mentality that we will figure things out, which in most case scenarios, when you consider the idea of perseverance, yes, certain people are able to figure things out in time and get where they need to be in time without any type of aid. However, some people do need that additional coaching, that additional push. And when they do not have it and they find themselves dealing with intense emotions and not knowing how to navigate them, we see symptoms of depression, anxiety, substance abuse. We see that, for instance, say someone's having a very stressful time at work and they don't know how to navigate through those intense emotions of separating themselves from work when they are off the clock. They may experience what we call ruminating thoughts, where they wonder, did I do enough when I was on the clock? Did I, document everything properly? I did this wrong. How do I fix this? But they're no longer on the clock. And for a lot of people, in order to silence these ongoing thoughts, they result to self-detrimental behavior that they consider to be a form of coping, such as substance use. It's not uncommon to hear when someone has, anxiety and depression that's ongoing, that they use substances such as alcohol, cannabis, nicotine as a sedative. But the more you rely on the substance to take away from the discomfort, the more we're seeing the disorder behavior counteract, where people may be using substances more frequently, every day, before work, on the way home from work, just to help them come to a baseline. But the issue is with substance use, when you're consistently using something like a substance to help you bring yourself back to your baseline because you don't know how to self-soothe, you go through what is considered withdrawals when you cannot have your substance. This is why we see people, despite concerns being brought at home, maybe driving offenses, they will still be using because they do not know how to self-soothe.
Mm-hmm. What role does racial identity play in mental health?
Racial identity plays a very significant role in mental health. There is a common understanding in the field that, unfortunately, given systems of oppression built way before, we go into the history of the DSM, we see that, people are treated differently in many aspects of the field given their color of their skin. This can be researched through the healthcare system, where we notice that, women of color may complain of ongoing pain, but they're told to kind of buck up, for lack of better terminology. This can be seen in the police system in regards to minorities receiving more traffic offenses, minorities being profiled, etc. Now, in the mental health field, it is understood that in certain aspects, minorities can be diagnosed with more aggressive diagnoses like bipolar, conduct disorder, etc. And a lot of the times, the issue is when you cannot connect with your client because you do not understand where they're coming from, you sometimes see their plight as the main diagnosis. Now, it is a spectrum between the relationship of understanding a client and the symptoms they present with. Now, being, a person of color in this field, I understand that my own biases can affect my judgment. So we have to be very careful in seeing what a client presents with, but understanding how the world around them plays into their behaviors.
Mm-hmm. What can we do as a society and as part of these communities to break down these stigmas?
Education, more stories. So 1 in 4 Americans will deal with a mental health disorder a mental health or substance use disorder within their lifetime. Within the minority community, we see that, when compared to their whites or Asian counterparts, this number may be a little bit lower, but it's due to underdiagnosis because there are less people reporting their stories. A lot of the times, we receive clients when they're already in crisis, when they've already reached rock bottom, for lack of a better terminology. When they've already had DCF involvement, criminal involvement, etc. And because these clients were not met with earlier, before, some of the issues they have been dealing with probably over the course of their lives, overwhelmed them, and the issue became to exacerbate, and maybe the behavior as a result of the issue was not the best judgment. We have to circle back to where do we go from now that the mess has already been created. With more stories told in advance, with more advocacy for mental health screening at a young age, we will see that there'll be a lot more success stories than working around already created messes.
Mm-hmm. What are some disparities in mental health services among minorities, and why do they exist?
So the disparities are that within the Black and brown communities, they are less likely to receive treatment. They're more likely to consider holistic approaches, such as religion, prayer, spiritualism, an intense work ethic. Specifically in the immigrant community, we notice that there's this mentality of like, what do you have to be accepted of if you have food in your mouth? Now that's mindfulness. In theory, looking at the glass as half full rather than half empty. But in certain instances, practicing mindfulness does not take away from underarching issues. Like, you have food in your mouth, but maybe you're in an abusive relationship. You have food in your mouth, but maybe you're dealing with trauma history that has gone under wraps because it's easier not to talk about it rather than it does. And when we realize in this field, when we don't talk about issues in the moment, the result is negative behavior. the result is a jaded lens of how the client looks at the world. Just quickly, we talk about a concept called cognitive behavioral therapy, where our automatic thoughts influence our mood, which is influences our actions. And a lot of the time, our automatic thoughts come from life experience. So as an individual that may have food in the house, that may have a great job, that may have access to a vehicle, a loving family, etc., the average Joe or Jane, if you have situational depression, situational trauma that maybe because you have chose not to deal with comes to you at random in thoughts, flashbacks, etc., sometimes what we notice is the trauma that is not dealt with will come back to you in the form of ruminating thoughts. The thoughts will then influence your mood, which will be sadness, anger, anxiety, which influences your behavior, which will then be increased substance use, social withdrawal, disturbances in eating and sleeping patterns, reckless behavior in the form of sexual activity. So the importance of not just relying on one aspect of spiritualism and blind optimism is very crucial in ensuring that that clientele in general are more likely to overcome and be perseverant toward some of the things they deal with.
Tell me about your work in the field and what are you doing to advocate for more inclusion within this field?
As mentioned, the field is predominantly consistent of Caucasian women, Asian women, mostly women in general. So being a black male in the field, I understand there's a certain story, there's a certain perspective that may not be understood. And part of what I try to push for amongst my staff members, amongst the field, is the ability to constantly expand your knowledge base. Interventions are not a one glove fit all. Everyone's different. Everyone has their own story. And when we forget to listen to new stories, when we forget to research, when we forget to expand the conversation, we're doing an injustice to the field. So my advice and what I try to do in the field is constantly expand the conversation, is constantly partner with individuals like myself who are, a minority within the field, and seeing where more knowledge is needed, where more research can be done to drive positive change.
But lastly, what message do you want to leave out to the audience regarding our topic this evening, mental health stigmas in Black and brown communities?
I would like to instill the message that despite what you've been told, despite your own reservations, there's nothing wrong about having a conversation outside of your social circle about things that may trouble you. It is always good to get alternative perspective. I believe that if your concern is finding someone that you can relate to, your insurance provider has the ability to provide you with a list of clinicians based off your zip code, based off your preferences. If you prefer to speak to a woman, they can provide you a list of women. If you prefer to speak to a person of color, they can provide you specifically a list of people of color if the therapists provide that speculation when licensing. But to not have the conversation is doing yourself an injustice.
Well, David, thank you very much. My last question for you is, why did you pick this field?
I think from a young age, I knew that I liked having conversations. I liked really meeting people where they were at. I always enjoyed listening in offering alternative opinion. And I think, throughout schooling, I found out I was really good at it. Listening, providing advice, doing a little bit of research, helping people get connected to resources. In college, I had the chance to work with children, and I knew after working with children and seeing the positive outcomes that came from the work, that I wanted to remain in this field. And the beauty of this field is you can do so much with it. You can work with children, you can work with elderly, you can work with adults, you can do direct work, you can do operations, you can lobby for change. Really, whatever you want to do, there is a place in the field for it, or a place where someone with your interest could be used. And, today, being able to lead group discussions, being able to be a part of success stories, being able to ensure that people are leaving my sessions happier than they came in is all the worthwhile.
Thank you, David. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Téléspectateurs, welcome. Jeudi, nous avons un show très spécial. Nous allons parler de anxiété, ça nous est en anglais anxiety. Comme invité, nous avons Edna Laurent avec nous, avec Dr. Regina Pierre. Donc, c'est un plaisir pour me dire Dr. Pierre et Edna Laurent, bienvenue à TeleLumiere.
Merci.
Bon, what is anxiety? How can you define it?
Well, anxiety really stems from feeling worry, fear, somewhat anxious. People may experience it through palpitations, concern about the unexpected. It varies. It depends on the symptoms being presented, but mostly it's associated with fear and worry.
Yeah.
You like to add something?
Yeah, so comme Dr. Pierre dit, OK, sou moun wè comme si, ou toujours appelé, comme si tout bagay monte dans tête ou appelé inquiété de bagay yo. Gen moun qui kon c'est ti moun. Yo kon gen ti moun et puis yo peur ti moun nan sorti dans la rue parce que yo t'entende moun on tel ba été rivé ou comprendre ça de la kounya ou penser ba la capable rivé yo, li capable rivé ti moun nan. Et puis yo toujours inquiété, so à cause d'inquiétude ça, li produit physique bagay physique tout côté comme si senti cœur ka bat.
Là je senti ou.
Là ou senti cœur bat, ou comprendre ou senti comme si ou pas à l'aise ou bien son bagay comme si ou ta cap dit différence de comme si ou dit un monde qui comme si OK, li gon inquiétude qui comme moun yo t'a dit avec anxiety, c'est que Jean-Docteur Pierre so dit anxiety a vraiment comme si ou pas qu'à banquer, li tellement comme si c'est tout en tête ou à bagaille ou pas chambre gon repos vraiment. Tête ou pas chambre gon repos vraiment. Nous capable dire.
Bon,
d'accord expliquer comme ça?
Oui.
Yeah, okay.
Are there several types of anxiety disorders?
There are various types. You can have, there's the main one that usually is talked about is generalized anxiety, and that's the fear or feeling anxious about everything, coming from experiences at home, experiences at work, experiences with your children, but the constant worry about something bad happening. Then you have specific phobias. You're afraid of a specific thing. For example, I'm afraid to go on an airplane because I think the airplane's gonna blow up or the plane's gonna crash. Then there's social phobias. Social phobias would be like someone coming here today and saying, okay, I have to speak in public. I'm scared of what the audience may say or how they may perceive me. Then there's OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. This is where people are obsessing over things and constantly concerned about things, and that fear of what's going to happen next, versus a compulsive symptom, which is I need to make sure I close the door 3 times or it's not locked. Or I need to, press my car alarm 4 times to make sure. Because if I don't click it the 4th time, that means the car is not locked. So there's various parts to anxiety. One of the other ones is panic disorder. That's a major, and that's where you feel like you're about to die. You feel heart palpitations, sweaty palms, difficulty breathing,
yeah.
As if like someone's on your chest. A lot of people present it as, I think I'm going to have a heart attack. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So those are various disorders associated with anxiety.
Yeah. So, encore, je me demandais comme si, est-ce qu'il y a différents types d'anxiety, quand le docteur Pierre expliqué, je me dit, si je expliqué, dans le sens haïtien, comme si, sous ta dit, mon une anxiety qui est généralisée. Généralisée, c'est que c'est tout bagage, pas un bagage spécifique. Mais il y a un bagage comme si, les gens comme si son bagage spécifique. Quand il y aurait les phobies, côté, les gens c'est peur pour monter avion, les gens peur tout pour rester dans côté qui est trop fermé, vous comprenez? Parce que comme si on doit avoir un bon monde dans une salle, et puis on vient, on dit, on est à l'aise.
Agoraphobia.
Yeah, les pas vle, vous comprenez, les pas rester vraiment. Ou bien, m'a dit panique attaque là, comme si le docteur Pierre t'a parlé de lui. Ou exemple, on est capable de dire dans la communauté, quand les gens doit venir sentir, quand c'est un bagage qui comme si chita sous l'estomac, qui pesé. Et puis c'est quand on pas capable respirer, ou pas capable faire mouvement, les gens doit dire, oh mais on va un morceau moi, ou comprenez, moi kembe moi fait, ou comprenez, ou bien, ou doit attribuer avec n'importe bagage comme si comme si c'est naturel parce que physiquement parce que chita physiquement ou doit paralyser. Vous comprenez, c'est comme si on pourrait mourir pas capable respirer.
C'est comme son panic attack.
C'est ça exactement. Mais mon comme si sous pas connaît panic attack ou doit penser, vous comprenez, les gens doit mon fin manger un bagage et puis il pense c'est bagage là qui fait ça et pourtant c'est pas vrai. Vous comprenez? So tout bagage ça comme si il y a différents comme si j'en ai différents types là. M'a dit, je t'ai parlé avec Dr. Pierre sur, OCD, l'homme comme si, tout le temps, c'est comme si tout bagaille, ok, li obsédé avec bagaille, c'est comme ça pour le faire, vous comprenez, tout bagaille, bah la supposé, j'en supposé, on commence à me dire, et puis toujours penser à lui-même et j'en, bah là, son bail comme si, qui pas parler trop dans la communauté, mais en pile monde, vous comprenez, ou gen ouais bagay là, c'est comme si ou pas capable de tête ou faut faire, faut camper pour faire, faut faire là. Et s'il pas comme ça, Jean ou vle là, OK, il pas OK. Et ou comme si bagay là, tout le monde ouais tout bagay là bien propre, oui, mais ou même, vous comprenez, il pas clean, il pas comme si bagay là pas clean assez pour, vous comprenez, il toujours au ça pas dans place, il faut mettre vous comprenez, ou obsédé, OK, avec bagay. Il y a des gens qui, comme si qui doit comme ça qui pas connaît ça qui passe, mais nous capable dire si moun n'a senti symptômes ça yo, c'est ça relé aussi dit m'ta c'est ouais c'est m'ta jeune moi créole pas fin journée. But tout symptômes ça yo fait partie de ou ta cap dire même famille anxiété.
But at what when there is a need to see a doctor?
When it adversely affects various parts of your life. For example, if it's affecting how you're relating to your family and friends in your social network, if it's affecting how you're doing your job, and for children, them being in school, then you should seek treatment. Because at that point, you don't have control. Like, if you can't, for example, if you're at work and you're having anxiety where you can't even do your day-to-day obligations or duties, and there's a possibility you may get fired or you're being written up, those are indicators for you. Or your family saying, what's wrong with you? What's going on? Why are you like that? In the constant flow of, I don't feel like I'm in control. I don't know why. Like, I'm scared of everything. And you're hearing your people around you saying these things, then it would be recommended that, you seek treatment.
Right. So, comme d'abord, c'est penser avec un exemple, OK, pour te dire, parce que il y a pile monde qui est anxieux, mais qui joue une façon, ils sont capables de vivre avec lui. Ils n'ont pas même besoin de voir monde même. Mais quand le docteur Pierre dit, mais si elle est affectée vie, OK, dans la caillou, avec monde, c'est un pile monde, si vous avez un bagage là, faut ouais, qu'on monde quand même, qui a un bagage beaucoup de là. Même dans la famille, comme si une famille a fait remarque, ou même ouais, ou un problème avec monde dans la famille. L'école, quand on m'a dit, go exemple comme si, disons que ou pral, comme si tu m'as pral faire un examen, ok? L'époque même, comme si il peut quand même il fait examen, OK, mais il pas penser comme si examen très bagaille. Il peut quand même des résultats non et puis il commence à dire oh, pas passer. C'est au failure. Tout de point que comme si nous connaît là, vous comprenez, là il pas même capable de respirer même, la crier, vous comprenez, la bagaille connaît là m'pas pas l'école encore parce que vous comprenez pas bon, m'pas bagaille. Et puis le test là tourné li gen même et dans test là même. So pas de aucune raison vraiment pour te faire tout bail ça yo. Moun nan gen doit anticiper un bagay qui pas là du tout qui gen doit cap venir. Oh mes amis, you know m'pa jamais joindre quand on chercher kay, m'pa jamais joindre kay. Et puis moun nan commencer, vous comprenez? A bagay kounye là, ça bal tellement problème, li gen doit comme si a crier, comme si depressed parce que nous t'a parlé avec docteur Pierre encore, là nous t'a parlé outil j'ai parlé de ça, nous dit on te mettait très bien, oui, comme si anxiety c'est cousin avec
like
you know
sibling to depression.
Sœur ou bien frère avec you know dépression.
They share a lot of similarities.
Exactement. Parce que moun nan comme si you know, li geta comme si you know tellement la comme si worry about bagay là. Moun nan gon kounye la gen doit comme si you know par exemple, moun nan gen doit lay off dans travail, OK? Mais li gen comme kounye la bagay, yo gen doit bal un employment, li gen mais moun nan commencer la inquiété, OK, m'pa jamais joindre ou travail encore. Ou comprendre m'pral perdre du kay moi, m'pral bagay kounye la à cause de tout bagay ça yo, li pas même ka fonctionner encore même. Li pas même capable lever pour la chercher l'autre travail. Li pas parce que kounye la tout ça dans tête li. Vous comprenez? C'est m'a perdu you know m'a perdu kay moi. Vous comprenez? M'pa bien comment m'pral homeless. Vous comprenez? Et puis moun nan commencer. So sou ouais bagay ça vini, li tellement vini, li ou pas capable fonctionner. Laisse ça nous capable dire ou besoin parler avec mon monde.
Besoin de spécialiste.
Exactement.
So what are the causes of anxiety disorders?
There's no specific symptom or an event that will trigger it. It is based on what the individual is experiencing. But one of the things I would say is something that causes that person discomfort. So if it's something that you don't feel control over, for example, Edna talked about, you know, children in school, right? They're taking a test. Now they're anxious about taking that test. Because of that, their studying is not done in a manner that would be more effective for them. They're having issues eating, they're not sleeping, and they're constantly in that state of, I'm gonna fail. Those are those triggers for you. But each individual, when you seek help, when you look at what are your triggers? What's the first thing that happens that causes you to behave that way? And once you recognize it, that's when you can start addressing the concerns.
Yeah. And capable ajouter tout, gen doit dire en anglais tout pour moun qui parle anglais pour comprendre tout. Gen facteur comme si nous regarder comme si nous génétique, OK, et environment. Parce que quand nous t'a dit comme si gagné neuroreceptors some pas essayer dire en créole. You can do it in English.
There are genetic factors, well, more so epigenetic factors associated with anxiety. And what that means is there are environmental and genetic contributions that cause anxiety. Now, when we think of anxiety, research and the data that has been gathered is anxiety is associated with GABA transmitters. They are inhibitor transmitters, and what they do is they help to minimize the level of anxiety. If that is not balanced, the opportunity for you to become anxious at a more rapid speed increases. So, and there's also your serotonin levels. Serotonin helps you relax. That, you know, it's a lot of the medications, SSRIs, are given for depression, but also doctors have given it for anxiety. And that is to help minimize the fluctuation or the imbalance of those neurotransmitters in your brain.
Exact. So exactement. So c'est comme si on t'a prend on t'a dit cerveau moun nan yo mettel non you know comme si en bas au microscope, OK? Et puis regarder basically you know gon bon you know chemical qui pour ta aider c'est pour nous balancer, yo gen doit voir comme si ou manquer ça ou comprendre déficience you know là-dedans. non, comme si te gen moun nan fam moun qui anxious, ou ap lever bon côté yo, OK?
Modeling.
Exactement. So, gen tout environnement, comme si environnement, OK? Quand on est capable de dire, moi-même, personnellement, je suis capable de dire, comme si, sous garde des communautés haïtiennes, les gens c'est parce que, comme si nous avons une histoire de trauma, mais en pile, dans moun yo, comme si, comme si, ou ap lever un petit moun, tout bagay ou peur. Si moun nan n'importe bagay, comme si c'est soit mettez dans tête ti moun nan. Vous comprenez? Ou peut me songe le m'a pleuvé depuis nous dit nous pral dans plage. Oh te gon moun moment c'est don moment te gen sel un petit oui. Vous comprenez? Là nan mel li noyé. OK? So kounye vous comprenez ça me là yo mettez ça dans tête ou. Yo mettez ça dans tête ou. Oh pas sorti là non tel bagay ou tel bagay doit arriver. Vous comprenez ça me là so kounye là ou commence vous comprenez? Tout bagay ça ou commencer à bagay dans tête ou. So, au cours du temps, nous sommes capables de dire, ou comme ça, ou qu'on va développer une anxiety.
Yeah, but tout feel ça accumulé.
Exactement. Yeah.
What are the risk factors?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me are the physical concerns associated with anxiety. So if your body is constantly in the anxious mode, cortisone levels are up. That means you're fight or flight. Like you're always like ready for a fight. You're ready like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Your body is not in a relaxed state. Then you think about people with cholesterol, high blood pressure, who are not able to manage the stressors in their lives, right? Because when those are all contributors. Like when people are talking about, I'm so stressed out, you're stressed out because you're anxious about something that you don't have control over. That adversely affects how your body functions. Because if you're not resting, if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, your body is deteriorating. So those could be detrimental. But then also look at your relationships with people. If you're constantly anxious, and especially like, for example, you think of the parent-child relationship, right? Parents model for their children. So if you're constantly anxious, saying, for example, swimming, if you go near the water, you're gonna drown, then you ask the question, why is my child unable to swim? Because you told them they're gonna drown. So they're scared of the water. So it affects your relationship, it affects your physical well-being, but it also affects how you function in your day-to-day life. Like when you're anxious, people are not thinking, I need to go exercise or I need to take a walk to calm myself down. Instead, you make your body tight, and it's almost like I'm ready for a fight, which goes to our culture, right? Haitians are viewed as being resilient. We're the fighters. We get through it. But there's a cost to that. So if you don't know how to manage that and say, okay, you know what, the fight is over, I can relax now.
Exactly.
You have a problem because you're constantly in that state. Then all of a sudden you go to your doctor and they're like, well, you're going to take this little blue pill for that, this little red pill for, and you're like, what's going on?
Exactly.
You're not managing your surroundings. You're not managing how your body's flowing. You're not managing your thought process and how you're perceiving things. Your body's in chaos. And that becomes problematic.
Right. So, m'pa même besoin comme si di bay excepté outil j'en conclure dans sens tout bagay physique dans tension, OK, cholestérol, en pile moun comme si même diabète, diabète, vous comprenez sucre, moun a fait sucre, tout bagay ça yo. L'op dit risk factor physiquement, OK, yo comme si ou basiquement ou pas dans traitement ou continuer comme ça, ou gen doit même diminuer la vie de 10 à 20 ans. OK, parce que c'est comme si ou vieillir
Corps détérioré.
Corps détérioré plus vite que tu as supposé détériorer. Mais en même temps, comme si le docteur Pierre dit, relation en tout, ou pas, tête ou pas penser bien. So quoi c'est tête ou comme si ou toujours non bagay comme si elle dit fight là physiquement comme si ou pas fight mais dans sens comme si ou tout prêt comme si depuis moun ta dou bagay pour réagir. Pour réagir.
Okay. Always on the edge.
Exactement. Yeah. Ou pas attendre ça mon ap dit vraiment. Ou pas capable ou pas capable fonctionner, ou pas comme si pour ta cap dit pour ta faire un bon raisonnement. Vous comprenez pour ta raisonner quand vous moun nan ou ta gon discussion avec moun nan là, vous comprenez s'il vraiment anxiety, vous comprenez a bagay, li pas cap gon
Rationnel.
exactement, ou rationnel, vous comprenez ou comme si vous comprenez parce que tout ça ou dit même mot ou dit yo cap vinn joindre yo, c'est comme si attaquer ou attaquer. So li même faut gommer.
We're going to start the paranoia là. Too. It's not quite the same thing, but
That's a topic for another day.
So, parce que ça pas fait, Dr. Pierre dit son sujet pour l'autre jour, c'est parce que tellement en pile dans bagay ça yo, ou moun gen doit paraître devant, OK? Et pour évaluer moun nan, OK? Ou gen doit dire anxiety, vous comprenez? Mais ou te gen doit diagnostiquer ça avec dépression tout. Ou te gen doit diagnostiquer ça avec ou comme si gen petit symptômes comme si yo interrelated, vous comprenez? Yo associé exactement comme ça parce que l'homme ou peur. Ou gen doit peur, ou peur non au point que ou un bagay là qui va exister.
Exactly.
Ou gen doit attendre un bagay qui pas vrai, mais c'est peur qu'il faut capable briver, vous comprenez?
And there's also, because you talked about a level of paranoia. There's cultural paranoia, which is not unhealthy. There's healthy paranoia.
Yeah.
Because you have to know what's in your environment. So you, as a community, going back to being resilient, we've had to struggle and fight and kind of push forward through certain things. So you had to know who to trust, who not to trust, what environments were safe, unsafe. So with certain individuals, that's healthy. Because depending on the chaos in their surrounding, like if you're living in an area where gunshots are being fired every night, people are selling drugs, like things like that, there has to be a strong level of paranoia because you need to understand those sounds and what's going on and be able to visualize what's happening. On a different perspective, it can cause you severe anxiety, where you can't even think straight, you can't even function, you hear a bottle break, you think somebody shot a gun. It's finding that balance. But you tend to realize it's anxiety when you don't even have control over your thoughts. Like it's just there's such a flow of thoughts. You even when people say breathe, you're like,
Yeah.
you can't even breathe.
Yeah.
Or you try to get a massage. A great example is, and Ella was talking, is when you go to a masseuse. And it was funny, I'll share a story, because there was a moment when I was anxious in my life, right? My masseuse, an Asian person, was like, relax, relax. The muscles in the shoulder were so tight that even when I was getting the massage, it was still tense. So that was a trigger for me. You have to figure out what your triggers are and work on those so that you're not feeling this way. We all experience some level of anxiety. That's normal. But when it's excessive to the point where it stops you from functioning, doing what you want to do with your life, that's when it's problematic.
Exactement. Et li très difficile quand on m'a dit tout, li très difficile pour bon monde comme si là où c'est ou même qui expérimenter là pour connaître pour ouais, c'est ça que toujours dit moun. Sou gen moun bon côté ou ouais comme si disons ou prendre compte avec moun tout le temps. Ou bien ou être moun quand moun yo dit get on my nerve, quand moun a toujours excité ou a toujours bagay ou.
Easily agitated.
Exactly. So ou fait comme si pour demander tête ou. Est-ce que pas gon bagay capable c'est moi-même parce que ou bien doit penser c'est tout moun yo k'avon yo et pourtant son bagay intérieur. OK? C'est pas moun yo vraiment. Li gen c'est ou même intérieurement. Mais li difficile comme si pour l'autre moun lè yo douli parce que quand on t'a dit sou toujours comme si comme ça, vous comprenez? Même le moun vient avec ou l'abdouli ou tout prêt pour coumer. Ou bien courir. Exactement. Parce que me dire quand on dit ça parce que en pile monde c'est courir.
So, the extreme.
It's the fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
And that's part of our nervous system. And if you don't know and you don't see those indicators and realize and kind of sit down and say, what's happening? I'm always like this?
Yeah.
Then you're going to continue to engage in those behaviors. The anxiety becomes normal to you. And for some people, we have to know, it becomes such a part of your life that you don't even want to let it go. Because you've normalized it.
Yeah.
Like this is how I am. This is who I am.
Yeah.
But it's not healthy for you.
Yeah.
So some people will say, "Bamgunna."
Yeah.
And it's
Actually,
not, and you're thinking to yourself, what is going on? Like, you need to address the concerns. But for people, it's it's like a safety net.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to say
Yeah.
it. It becomes a safety net, and it becomes part of who you are. So to leave that is hard, because then that requires change. And some people are not comfortable with change.
Exact. Et bien content que docteur Pierre mentionné ça parce que grand pile monde qui pensait comme si le fait que moun nan gon problème ou bien ou même ou gen droit gen problème non gen droit confortable ou et puis li facile pour monde nan di oh qui de mal dans traitement OK qui de mal faut bail c'est une bagage comme si moun supposé qu'on est parce que changement toujours dû et sous anxious déjà anxiety c'est qu'on peut pas cap deal avec bagage qu'on pas connaît. OK, si pas familier avec lui, c'est ça qui provoque anxiety. OK? So même changement, quand on m'a dit un exemple, je capable dire monde comme si yo connaît vraiment et puis yo ba remède et puis yo outil Jean calme yo bagay. Li étrange pour yo. Gen qui gen comme si saboter en traitement yo va prendre remède là.
Yeah, ça you fin habitué un lifestyle déjà.
Exactement. Vous comprenez? Et puis, vous-même, vous avez dit, oh, but c'est un symptôme que nous avons dit. Vous comprenez? Qui est exactement à cause de l'anxiété, OK? Moun comme si il peur changement. Et puis, il doit comme si apprêter, comme si moun dit pathogène dans même bagay là.
Bon, nous pas grand pile temps devant nous. Dernière question pour nous. How do you diagnose anxiety disorder and how do you treat it?
That is such a broad question that I'm going to smile. The reason I say that is there are different anxiety disorders in the DSM. So you would have to identify that specific disorder, look at how long have you been experiencing those symptoms, and what are those symptoms? Because diagnosing panic disorder versus generalized disorder, there are certain, the requirements per the DSM are different. OCD, different. So in order to treat it, you have to identify which anxiety disorder are you dealing with or are you trying to address and remedy, and then look at the different treatments. There's medication. Like I said earlier, some people take SSRIs, which are serotonin. Some people will take medication that addresses the GABA issue, some which include a benzo. But some people who are not really
What
medication.
About psychotherapy?
I wasn't even, because usually what happens is, it's when you're feeling those symptoms, they always say see your doctor first. And the reason is it could be something different. It could be something else. You don't want it to be a heart attack, and then it's not a panic attack. And you're sitting there like, I have a panic attack.
Right.
You want to make sure you're getting that medical attention. Now, usually doctors will say, see someone, get treatment. There are individuals who are there that can help you, and that could be a therapist, psychologist, social worker, whatever the case may be, whatever your preference is. And there you can kind of process, going back, the triggers. What's causing you to become anxious all the time? Do you like being anxious? Because some people are like, I'm comfortable with it. Figure out something else. But it's playing that dance or engaging in that dance to figure out what's best. Also, exercise. Physical activity helps.
Yes.
And people think, oh, I need to walk or I need to go to gym. No. Like, if you like dancing, in our community, we love to dance. Engaging in some of those things may be helpful and help you relax and let the body calm itself down after being in such chaos.
Exactement. So, nous connaissons nous pas grand pile temps. Nous capable dire en pile monde encore ou un docteur, OK, sous senti comme si ou comprendre symptômes ou ta gen symptômes que vous dit comme si toute bagage ça vous senti yo. Traitement comme si nous gen comme si aller un psychologue ou bien un social worker un thérapeute ou monde qui capable parler avec vous. Qui genre parle comme si sous gen bagage là que docteur Pierre dit, faut chita avec moun nan ou parler avec moun yo et pour expliquer yo ça bagage et puis connait là selon son dit yo pral déterminer qui ça lié. Et puis selon ça lié c'est là ça connaît qui traitement pour bail. OK? Mais traitement yo comme dit
Il varie selon type de
selon type là, gen médicaments, OK? Gen thérapie comme si nous dit mais encore tout en pile bagage que nous capable faire pour nous relaxer tête nous. Comme si sous gen moun qui gen anxiety qui pas capable faire méditation parce que tête li toujours vous comprenez, il pas capable calmer tête pour faire méditation. Danser. You know, mettez musique dans ka là, vous comprenez ça m'dou là, danser. Faire un bagage comme si nous exercer, faire exercice. Tout bagage ça yo aider. Vous comprenez? Puis comme si relax tête tout et même là n'a parlé de sérotonine, you know, dopamine, tout bagage ça yo exercer, l'or faire bagage ça tout naturellement. Corps produire bagage ça naturellement. Moi-même comme si nous toujours parler ça, nous promoter plus comme si qui ça naturel qu'on capable faire avant que nous parler de remède. Gen moun premier ça nous dit prends remède. Parce qu'on arrive à un point côté même sous tes danser, même sous tes méditer, faire exercice ou li trop loin, li rive trop loin. So l'autre fait bagage ça va veut dire prendre remède là toute reste vie. En ton remède là, ou gen doit faire thérapie. Et puis thérapie après aller dos pour que qui j'en parle comme si commencer à penser différent. Vous comprenez? Qui compte dit trigger comme si qui ça qui
cognitive restructuring.
Yeah, exactement. Qui ça qui faut comme si a fait comme si a agir comme ça bagage qui sont capable penser avec ça différent. Vous comprenez? Ou chita ou fait exercice ça avec mon nan et puis entre remède là et ça ou li gen doit arriver là que lui même li capable faire, il pas besoin de remède encore et li gen doit mener en vie côté c'est pas pour dire li gen doit comme si il est toujours dans anxiety mais il capable deal avec lui, il capable mener en vie, il capable fonctionner.
Si on a besoin plus d'aide pour contacter Edna Laurent ou bien docteur Regina Pierre, qui numéro et qui adresse?
OK, so nous dans 37 Belmont Street, dans 3e floor et numéro de téléphone c'est 617 749 74 84. So 37 Belmont Street, 3rd floor, Brockton, Mass, and it's 617-749-7484.
Thank you.
Thank you.